In the bustling terminal of Atlanta International Airport, a first-class passenger in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit stood patiently at the gate, his carry-on placed neatly beside him. As a seasoned business traveler with over 2 decades of aviation industry experience, he was no stranger to the occasional flight delay or booking hiccup. But what transpired that Wednesday morning would soon become a viral moment that sparked crucial conversations about prejudice and assumptions in modern society. The gate agent's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing priority boarding for first-class passengers. As the well-dressed man stepped forward, a flight attendant quickly intercepted him, her voice dripping with condescension. "Sir, we're currently boarding first-class passengers only," she stated firmly, despite his clearly visible first-class boarding pass. The surrounding passengers shifted uncomfortably, some already pulling out their phones. "I understand," he replied calmly, maintaining his composure as he once again presented his boarding pass. The flight attendant barely glanced at it before calling over her supervisor. By now, a small crowd had gathered, watching the scene unfold. The supervisor approached with an equally dismissive attitude, suggesting there must have been some mistake with his ticket. What the crew didn't realize was that this passenger had just been appointed as the airline's new chief executive officer following a unanimous board decision last week. He had intentionally chosen to fly as a regular passenger to experience the airline's service firsthand, a decision that would prove more enlightening than he could have anticipated. As tensions escalated, more staff members congregated around the gate, each one seemingly more determined than the last to prove this passenger didn't belong in first class. Their behavior grew increasingly unprofessional, with whispered comments and skeptical glances that didn't go unnoticed by other travelers. Several passengers began recording the interaction on their phones, recognizing the blatant discrimination unfolding before their eyes. The new CEO maintained his dignity throughout the ordeal, even as the staff's actions became more overtly discriminatory. He calmly reached for his phone and made a brief call. Within minutes, a senior airport operations manager rushed to the gate, his face turning pale as he recognized the passenger. The dramatic shift in the crew's behavior that followed would soon become one of the most talked about moments in recent aviation history. This incident would not only transform company policy but would spark a nationwide dialogue about unconscious bias in customer service. As the videos began circulating on social media platforms, they captured millions of views and ignited discussions about the persistent reality of discrimination in everyday situations. The events that unfolded next would leave the airline's staff speechless and serve as a powerful reminder that appearances can be deceiving and respect should be a universal standard, not a privilege based on assumptions. As the CEO finally boarded the plane, he wasn't just carrying his luggage. He was carrying the weight of a moment that would become a turning point for corporate America's approach to diversity and inclusion. Little did anyone know that this seemingly routine boarding process would lead to one of the most significant shakeups in the airline industry's recent history. As the other passengers settled into their seats, watching the now flustered crew members scramble to adjust their attitudes, the tension in the cabin was palpable. The real story, however, was just beginning to unfold at 30,000 feet above ground. What happened next would not only change the trajectory of this flight, but would also catalyze a series of events that would transform the entire airline's corporate culture. The truth about the passenger's identity was about to emerge, and the consequences would reverberate throughout the industry in ways no one could have predicted. As the plane reached cruising altitude, the CEO sat quietly in his first-class seat, observing the subtle changes in the crew's behavior. The same flight attendant who had questioned his presence at the gate now hovered nearby, her earlier confidence replaced by visible anxiety. She had noticed the operations manager's dramatic reaction and sensed that something significant was amiss, but couldn't quite piece together the puzzle. The CEO reflected on his journey to this moment. 25 years ago, he had started as a baggage handler at this very airline, working early mornings and late nights while putting himself through business school. Through determination and exceptional business acumen, he had climbed the corporate ladder, transforming struggling regional carriers into profitable enterprises along the way. His appointment as CEO hadn't been handed to him. He had earned it through decades of proving himself in an industry that hadn't always welcomed people who looked like him. Midway through the flight, a senior crew member who had been briefed about the situation approached him with trembling hands, offering apologies and premium services. The CEO politely declined, requesting instead to be treated like any other passenger. He pulled out his laptop and began documenting his observations, knowing that tomorrow's scheduled meeting with the airline's board would now have a very different agenda. Other passengers who had witnessed the gate incident were now whispering among themselves, some sharing the videos they'd captured. A few had already posted them online, where they were gaining traction with each passing minute. The hashtag airline discrimination was trending, though the full story had yet to emerge. The true identity of the calm, dignified passenger remained unknown to the public, adding to the growing intrigue. In the galley, the flight crew huddled together, piecing together fragments of information. One flight attendant had received a text from ground staff about the passenger's identity, and the color drained from their faces as the realization set in. Their discriminatory assumptions and actions had been directed at none other than their new chief executive, the man who would soon be responsible for the entire airline's operations and their employment. As the plane continued its journey, the CEO's mind wandered to his predecessor's parting words during the leadership transition. "The airline looks good on paper," the former CEO had said, "but there's something wrong with our culture that numbers can't show." Now, experiencing firsthand the very issues that might have been hiding beneath those polished quarterly reports, he understood exactly what his predecessor had meant. He thought about his own children and the world they were growing up in. His daughter, a recent medical school graduate, had shared similar stories of being questioned about her credentials despite wearing her white coat. His son, a junior executive at a tech firm, still got stopped by security when entering his own office building. These experiences, though frustrating, had shaped his leadership philosophy and strengthened his resolve to create meaningful change. The flight tracker showed another hour until landing, but the CEO already knew his first 100 days would look very different from what he had initially planned. This wasn't just about one incident or a few misguided employees. It was about systemic issues that required systematic solutions. He began outlining a comprehensive transformation plan, knowing that the real turbulence wouldn't be in the air, but in the sweeping changes he would need to implement. As the plane began its initial descent, tension still hung thick in the cabin. The crew's anxiety was palpable. Passengers remained captivated by the unfolding drama, and social media was ablaze with speculation. But for the CEO, this was more than just a viral moment waiting to happen. It was an opportunity to turn an embarrassing incident into a catalyst for genuine institutional change. What would happen when they landed, however, would shock everyone involved. As the aircraft touched down, news vans were already gathering at the terminal. The videos from the boarding incident had exploded online, with major news networks picking up the story. Inside the plane, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife as passengers reached for their phones, eager to share their part in what had become the day's biggest viral story. The CEO remained in his seat as other passengers disembarked, using these quiet moments to gather his thoughts. Through the cabin windows, he could see the growing media presence, a situation he hadn't anticipated on what was supposed to be a routine flight. His phone buzzed continuously with messages from board members, PR teams, and airline executives, all scrambling to address the unfolding situation. The flight crew, now fully aware of his identity, stood nervously near the cockpit. The same flight attendant who had confronted him at the gate was visibly distressed, likely seeing her career flash before her eyes. What she and her colleagues didn't know was that the CEO had spent the flight crafting something very different from termination notices. As he finally rose to leave, the captain emerged from the cockpit, his face ashen. Word had reached him mid-flight about his first-class passenger's identity, and he had spent the remainder of the journey dreading this moment. But before anyone could speak, the CEO did something unexpected. He requested all crew members to join him in the now empty first-class cabin. The impromptu meeting that followed would later be described by one flight attendant as the longest 15 minutes of my life. The CEO spoke quietly, ensuring every word carried weight. He shared stories of his own journey through the aviation industry, the barriers he'd faced, and the changes he'd witnessed. The crew shifted uncomfortably as he pulled out his phone, showing them the viral videos that were now circulating online. Outside the aircraft, airline executives had gathered, anxiously awaiting their new CEO's emergence. The media presence had doubled, with reporters speculating about potential lawsuits, firings, and PR disasters. But inside the cabin, something entirely different was taking shape, a conversation that would soon reshape the airline's entire approach to customer service and corporate culture. The CEO leaned forward in his seat, looking each crew member in the eye as he revealed the contents of the notes he'd been taking throughout the flight. Instead of a list of grievances, he had drafted the framework for a revolutionary training program, one that would eventually become a model for the entire industry. But first, he had a proposition for this very crew, one that would either make or break their careers. As he outlined his unexpected proposal, the atmosphere in the cabin shifted palpably. The flight attendant who had first confronted him at the gate was now holding back tears, though for very different reasons than anyone might have expected. The CEO's words were challenging long-held assumptions and presenting an opportunity that none of them had seen coming. Through the cabin windows, camera flashes continued to light up the terminal. Social media was ablaze with speculation about what was happening inside the aircraft. The airline's PR team was frantically trying to manage the situation, unaware that their new CEO was about to turn this potential disaster into something revolutionary. Just then, the CEO stood up, straightened his suit, and prepared to exit the aircraft. The next few minutes would determine not just the fate of this crew, but potentially the future of airline customer service standards worldwide. As he reached for the cabin door, he turned back one last time to the stunned crew members, about to deliver words that would be quoted in business schools for years to come. Just as the CEO reached for the cabin door, his phone buzzed with an urgent message. The airline's largest shareholder, a notoriously conservative board member, had caught wind of his impromptu meeting with the crew and was vehemently opposing any resolution that didn't involve immediate terminations. "This is a PR nightmare that needs swift and decisive action," the message read, followed by a thinly veiled threat about reconsidering the CEO's appointment. The crew watched anxiously as their fate hung in the balance. The CEO glanced at the message, then at the faces before him, faces that showed genuine remorse and a desperate desire for redemption. In his 2 decades in the industry, he'd seen countless incidents swept under the rug with hasty firings and generic corporate apologies. But he knew that real change required something bolder. Outside, the situation had escalated further. Civil rights organizations had gotten wind of the incident, and their representatives were now joining the media crowd at the terminal. Social media was divided, with some calling for boycotts while others demanded immediate action against the crew. The hashtag had evolved from hashtag airline discrimination to hashtag airline CEO standoff as speculation grew about the extended delay in the aircraft. The flight attendant who had initiated the gate confrontation suddenly stepped forward, her voice shaking but determined. She revealed something that added another layer to the already complex situation. She had been following a recently implemented unofficial protocol, one that had been quietly encouraged by middle management to maintain passenger quality standards in first class. Her admission sent shockwaves through the cabin and would soon send tremors through the entire corporate structure. The CEO's expression darkened as he realized the incident wasn't just about individual bias. It was symptomatic of a deeper institutional problem. His phone buzzed again, this time with messages from other crew members across the airline, sharing similar stories of unwritten rules and subtle pressures to profile passengers. The story was growing beyond a single viral incident into something that could shake the entire industry. As he processed this revelation, the airport's security team approached the aircraft, responding to the mounting pressure from media and protesters gathering outside. They needed to escort everyone off the plane, but doing so would mean facing the cameras, the protesters, and the consequences of whatever decision was about to be made. The CEO knew that his next move would define not just his leadership, but potentially change the landscape of air travel. The flight attendant's hands trembled as she pulled out her own phone, showing emails and messages that documented the unofficial profiling practices. Other crew members began sharing similar evidence, revealing a pattern that stretched back months. the CEO realized he was standing at a crossroads. He could follow the board's pressure for quick damage control, or he could use this moment to expose and dismantle something far more insidious. Security radioed again, growing increasingly urgent about the situation outside. The crew looked to their new CEO with a mixture of fear and hope. His original plan for handling the situation now seemed inadequate in light of these new revelations. As he stood in the cabin doorway, he knew his next words and actions would either make him the most controversial or the most transformative CEO in the airline's history. Drawing a deep breath, he turned to face both the crew and the waiting cameras. The evidence on his phone felt heavy in his hand, proof of systemic issues that went far beyond one incident of discrimination. As he prepared to step out of the aircraft, he made a decision that would send shockwaves through not just his airline, but the entire aviation industry. What happened next would become legendary in corporate America. As the CEO stepped onto the jet bridge, he made an unprecedented decision. Instead of heading to the waiting press conference, he pulled out his phone and began a live stream from his personal social media account. "Good afternoon," he began, his voice steady and clear. "I'm the new CEO of this airline, and today I experienced firsthand what many of our passengers face daily. But this story is bigger than just me." Standing beside him, the flight attendant who had confronted him earlier stepped forward voluntarily, tears streaming down her face. Instead of offering excuses, she bravely detailed the unofficial profiling practices, explaining how they had been subtly pressured to maintain certain standards in first class. Her honest admission, streamed-lived to thousands of viewers, would later be praised as a crucial moment of corporate transparency. The CEO then did something that sent the airline's PR team into a frenzy. He began reading excerpts from the evidence gathered during the flight, including messages from other crew members across the network. But instead of calling for terminations, he announced an immediate company-wide transformation. "Today, we're not just changing policies," he declared. "We're changing our entire culture, and we're starting with the people who showed us where the problems are." To everyone's shock, he announced that the crew from his flight would be appointed to lead a new passenger advocacy board, working directly with him to reshape the airline's approach to customer service and inclusion. The flight attendant who had discriminated against him would chair the committee, using her experience to help identify and eliminate discriminatory practices throughout the company. The board member who had threatened his position earlier was now frantically calling, but the CEO continued his live stream. He outlined a comprehensive plan that would make their airline the industry leader in inclusive service, including mandatory bias training, revamped hiring practices, and a groundbreaking passenger bill of rights. The stock price began fluctuating wildly as investors watched the unprecedented scene unfold. But the biggest surprise came when he revealed that this wasn't just about one airline. He announced partnerships with civil rights organizations and other airlines to establish industry-wide standards for inclusive service. The very incident that could have ended careers was being transformed into a catalyst for systemic change. The gathered media watched in amazement as protesters lowered their signs and began listening intently to his words. The flight attendant stood tall now, her initial shame transformed into determination to be part of the solution. Other crew members joined them, each adding their own experiences and commitments to change. Just as it seemed the story was reaching its conclusion, the CEO received another message. The board had called an emergency meeting to vote on his position, citing his unorthodox handling of the situation. The tension in the terminal was palpable as he opened the message, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "The board has reached a decision," he announced to the now silent crowd. But before he could reveal their verdict, something unexpected happened. The airline's employees, from baggage handlers to pilots, began gathering in the terminal. They had been watching the live stream, and one by one, they were leaving their posts to stand with their new CEO. Looking at the assembled crowd, the CEO held up his phone one last time. The board's message was replaced by something else, a trending topic that would change everything. #StandWithChange was now the #1 trending hashtag worldwide, and major airlines across the globe were pledging to join the movement he had just started. The flight that began with discrimination had transformed into a watershed moment for corporate accountability and social change. As the CEO looked at the faces around him, the remorseful crew members, the supportive employees, the engaged public, he knew that sometimes the best way to lead isn't by pointing fingers, but by building bridges. The airline industry would never be the same, and it all started with a first-class ticket and a CEO who chose understanding over outrage. In the weeks that followed, the airline underwent a remarkable transformation. The board's vote had been unanimous in favor of keeping the CEO, not because of public pressure, but because his handling of the situation had resulted in the highest employee morale scores in company history and an unexpected surge in customer loyalty. The video of the incident, followed by the CEO's innovative response, had garnered over 50 million views across social media platforms. The flight attendant who had initially confronted the CEO became an unlikely hero in the corporate world. Her willingness to acknowledge the systemic issues and work toward change earned her invitations to speak at conferences about corporate culture and inclusive leadership. She often began her speeches by saying, "My biggest mistake led to my greatest opportunity to make a difference." The Passenger Advocacy Board, now in full swing, had already implemented groundbreaking changes. They established a transparent reporting system for discrimination incidents, created a diverse customer advisory council, and launched a scholarship program for underrepresented groups interested in aviation careers. Other airlines, seeing the positive public response and business benefits, began adopting similar initiatives. 3 months after the incident, the CEO hosted a special event in the same terminal where everything had unfolded. Employees from every level of the company gathered to celebrate the launch of their new training center for inclusive excellence. The atmosphere was different now. Gone was the tension and uncertainty, replaced by a genuine sense of pride and purpose. During the ceremony, he shared something he hadn't revealed before. The day he was confronted at the gate wasn't his first experience with discrimination in first class. He had faced similar situations throughout his career, but had always stayed quiet to maintain professionalism. Sometimes, he told the gathered crowd, the right moment chooses you to speak up and make a difference. The airline's new advertising campaign, featuring real stories of passengers and crew members, became a case study in authentic corporate responsibility. Bookings soared as customers resonated with the company's genuine commitment to change. The stock price, after its initial volatility, reached an all-time high. Perhaps the most meaningful change came from within. The unofficial profiling protocols that had once plagued the airline were replaced by a culture of genuine hospitality. Crew members reported feeling empowered to treat every passenger with equal respect and dignity, without fear of management pressure to maintain artificial standards. 1 year later, as the CEO prepared to board another flight, something remarkable happened. A young flight attendant approached him, not to check his credentials, but to share how the changes had inspired her to apply for a management position. "Your story showed me that leadership isn't about authority," she said. "It's about having the courage to change things for the better." The incident that could have been another viral outrage story had instead become a blueprint for corporate transformation. Business schools now used it as a case study in crisis management and cultural change. But for the CEO, the real success wasn't in the headlines or business metrics. It was in the small, daily interactions that showed how deeply the change had taken root. As he settled into his seat, he smiled at the framed photo now hanging in every crew room across the airline's network. It showed the moment when employees had gathered in the terminal to support change, with a simple caption beneath. "Progress begins when someone is brave enough to transform a moment of prejudice into an opportunity for growth." The story of the CEO and the discriminatory airline crew had evolved into something much bigger. A reminder that real change doesn't come from quick fixes or public relations strategies, but from the courage to face uncomfortable truths and the wisdom to transform them into opportunities for growth. In the end, what began as a potential PR disaster had become a masterclass in leadership, proving that sometimes the most powerful response to discrimination isn't outrage, but transformation.